Hello. Thank you very much all for coming, and welcome to the first installment of this year's Council on Aging series regarding a number of elder issues. My name is Arthur Bergeron. I see somebody saying I should talk louder. Can you hear me in the back? I'll try to even talk slowly, although we are going to try to cover quite a bit of material today. Today's presentation is really focusing on Alzheimer's disease. One of the things that I realized over the winter, when I was thinking about the presentations that we do and the issues that people raise for me, is they talk to me about a lot of issues that are related to planning and getting my assets all set and a bunch of things. What they're really talking about in most cases is that they're worried about Alzheimer's or something else that could cause dementia. Because as many people are aware, the healthcare system and the healthcare insurance system doesn't do a great job of insuring for this and making sure that people can handle this issue. And there's just a tremendous amount of misconception about Alzheimer's disease. As I often say, Alzheimer's, instead of being considered a disease, is often considered to be more of an embarrassment. And so there are a lot of issues around that. So we thought that we would try to take one presentation and package a lot of material around that. I asked two guests to come with me, Tammy Pozaricki, who runs an adult day health program, and she'll talk about that, and Becky Nato from Elder Services of Greater Worcester, Inc. Did I get that right? which is the regional entity, that the nonprofit that covers this area and the other communities, Worcester and immediately surrounding Worcester, and really oversees many of the major programs that deal with Alzheimer's disease. So I wanted to start by talking about, now you've seen, for many of you who have been here before, you've seen Frank and Mary. And we're going to be talking about Frank and Mary. So Frank and Mary have got a house. They live here in Grafton. The house is worth $300,000. He has an IRA worth $150,000. They have an annuity worth about $100,000, and they have a bank account worth about $75,000. So they're not rich, but they're okay. He's on Social Security, she's on Social Security, and they're going to be okay as long as they do not end up having to spend serious money on medical or other related issues. But we're going to be, and so that's one of the examples that we're going to be using. Next slide. Then I'm also going to be talking about what happens if it's just Mary. If Frank has died and it's just Mary and her daughter, Mary Jr., and they're trying to figure out kind of how to deal with some of Ma's issues. So we're going to be talking about those two folks as we go along today. But first I wanted to just talk about, and I've asked Tammy to talk about Alzheimer's disease, about the issues regarding Alzheimer's, who gets it, why do they get it, what kind of preventive things you can do regarding Alzheimer's, and then from there we're going to talk about, if you're worried about Alzheimer's, and the possibility that you or a loved one might get it later on, what, if anything, you should be doing now as a planning matter. Thank you. Tammy?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tammy Pozaricki with Pleasantries Adult Day and Consulting Services, which is in Marlborough. It's a little bit far from here, but I made it here in 20 minutes, so it's not that far. To know just some facts about Alzheimer's disease.
And Debbie, and Tammy, thank you.
I walk a lot. More than 5 million Americans suffer with this disease. We have every 68 seconds someone is newly diagnosed with this disease. And 15.2 million friends and family members are caring for an individual with Alzheimer's disease. The amount of caregiving that goes on that is not paid for, so unpaid caregiving, is in the millions. What I want to make clear to you folks, I'm going to go through the symptoms of Alzheimer's later, but just to make you aware, when people say dementia is a set of symptoms. Alzheimer's is the most prevalent type of dementia. That's why it's such a big discussion right now, and the numbers just keep growing. It is non-curable, it is treatable, but non-curable, and it progresses. And there are things that I'm going to talk about of how we can slow that disease process down, and also what some of your concerns might be about Alzheimer's if you feel as though you're concerned about a loved one or yourself.
So do you want to go through those?
If you look here, Alzheimer's and dementia care cost the United States over $200 billion in 2012. The new statistics are actually out for 2013, and they're on the Alzheimer's Association's website, which is in your packet. 10% of the people ages 65 and older will develop it. Half of everyone over the age of 85. 1 out of 3 seniors will come down with some form of dementia. And when I speak of dementia, I'm talking a lot of different types of dementia. And basically, it's a neurological brain disorder and a disease. And the cognitive abilities of a person, the mental capacity of a person diminishes with time. And prevention. Talk about prevention 1 quick second. When we hear, how do we prevent a heart attack or diabetes? Healthy diet, exercise. The most important, mind stimulation. We don't use it, we lose it. That's what the statistics and research are showing, that if we follow a heart-healthy diet, foods high in antioxidants, a glass of red wine at night, doing those brain games and puzzles. There are plenty of things we can do if we are currently healthy to sort of ward off Alzheimer's in the long run.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about, for people who are worried about Alzheimer's, but they're not feeling like they or their loved ones are exhibiting symptoms right now and they needed to be doing some preparation. So what can you do? And now some of this is information that you've heard from radio commercials or TV ads. There's a number of folks who are trying to convince you of stuff that you should be doing. I want to talk about a few of those things and talk about it in context. Next slide. So first we're going to talk about what Mary could be doing if Frank has passed away and it's just Mary. And the reason why I'm going to start, so I'm going to start with her, and the reason for that will be more clear once we get to Mary and Frank. If you are Mary and you are concerned about Alzheimer's, you're concerned because if you get it and you get stuck either in a nursing home or needing a lot of care at home so that you can stay out of a nursing home, you're going to be paying for that on private pay. The reason for that is because Medicare and other health insurance programs do not pay for extended stays in the nursing home. Health insurance pays for the cost of getting better, not for the cost of staying the same. So if you're in a nursing home for more than 100 days, even after you've left the hospital, as far as Medicare is concerned, they're going to stop paying. So the question is, in nursing home costs, they range, but on the high side right now, they're about $150,000 a year. So it's a significant cost. It ranges from about $125,000 to $150,000 a year. So the question is, what can you do? The answer is, the only government program that will pay for that kind of care is Mass Health. Mass Health is the Massachusetts name for the Medicaid program. Next slide. To qualify for Mass Health, Mary would have to have less than $2,000 in countable assets. $2,000. So all the other money that you just saw on that list would have to get spent down before she could qualify. Then she could qualify and still own her home, as long as when she files the application for Mass Health, she says that she intends to go back home. Now that's a real issue because it's a good chance she's not going to be going back home. But that's the way you need to fill out the form. If she does that though, Mass Health will put a lien on the house. We'll put a lien on the house, and after her death, Mass Health will expect to be paid back for anything that Mass Health has paid to take care of nursing home care. So what can she do? Next. Well, first of all, whatever she does, the kind of standard answer originally when Mass Health was created was, I'll just give away my assets, and then I can qualify. And actually, you could. When Medicaid was created, there was no so-called look-back period. You could literally impoverish yourself on day 1 and apply for Mass Health on day 2. That's no longer the case. you've all heard of the magic number, the 5-year look-back period. If you're going to qualify for Mass Health, you have to show that you have not made gifts, that is, transfers for less than fair market value, within the previous 5 years. What do? Well, Mary could give gifts to Mary Jr. or to anybody else that she wants to give gifts to. The question that that'd be perfectly, and on the first day following the 5th anniversary of those gifts, those assets would not be countable if she needed to apply for Mass Health. Are there any reasons not to do that? Well, the first question that she'd want to ask herself is, will that money be safe? Because of course, if she was doing that, she was giving that money away, assuming that if she needed it, she could get it back, or that the money would be provided for her benefit. So as long as she feels very comfortable with Mary Jr., she can just transfer the money. If she's worried, though, about Mary Jr.'s creditors, or Mary Jr.'s husband, or anybody else that might be interested in that money, she may have some concerns. The second issue I would raise is regarding the house. If she were to give Mary Jr. the house, she would be giving her that house with Mary Sr.'s tax basis. That is, what did Mary Sr. pay for that house? And if Mary Jr. turns around and sells the house, unless she has been living in it for at least 2 years, she's going to incur a large capital gain on which she's going to have to pay a very big capital gains tax. So there may be reasons why, when you own real estate or stock, things that have appreciated in value, you may not want to be making direct gifts to your children. Next slide. And that's where people hear about irrevocable trusts. If you've got assets that you're concerned that you want to know where they are, even though you're giving them away, or you've got these capital gains concerns, you may want instead to consider putting assets into an irrevocable trust. But I wanted to talk about those for a second. Irrevocable trusts, interestingly, can be amended. Irrevocable means, for legal purposes, that the person who created the trust and put the money in can't simply say, I'm taking it all back. I'm revoking the trust, and I'm exercising my right as a person who created a trust to simply take the money back. The presumption is, if the trust doesn't say whether it's revocable or irrevocable, that it's revocable, and that the person who put the money in can take the money back at any time. Well, for obvious reasons, Mass Health says, if you put money into an irrevocable trust, but you can take it back anytime, well, it's still yours. And for that reason, it's still going to be countable. The trust can be amendable, though, in any way, except one. And we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes. Anybody can be the trustee, the manager of the money, but I wouldn't recommend having Mary Sr. be the manager, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And Mary Jr. or anybody else can be the beneficiary. Next slide. The key to understanding irrevocable trust is this line. These are the words from the federal law that allows Mary to transfer assets to an irrevocable trust. In order for the money that's in there to be safe, she has to comply with this. And this is actually the citation from the federal law. If there are any circumstances under which payments from the trust could be made to or for the benefit of the individual, any circumstances, then those transfers from that individual into the trust are countable and have to be used to pay down the nursing home. Examples. If you've got a trust, and the reason why I use these examples is it's so often I've heard lawyers try to explain to people that they can have their cake and eat it too. That they can put money into an irrevocable trust while still having control over all that money. Can't do it. If you've got, for example, an irrevocable trust in which the senior, Mary in this case, who put the money into trust, can borrow from it, even though she's not listed as a beneficiary who could receive distributions, then to the extent that she can borrow money from the trust, she, under some circumstances, can get the money, which means all the trust assets are countable. What if Mary is the trustee? If she still has control over the trust as the trustee, there's a reasonable chance that the trust is going to be declared invalid. If the trustee can dissolve the trust at any time and then distribute money back to Mary, there's going to be a real problem with that. There was a recent case on this that you folks may have heard of called the Doherty case, where there was a trust which contained a series of powers in the trustee, who was the child. And among others, the trustee had the right at any time, for any reason, to decide that the trust was no longer practical to administer, and therefore it could be dissolved. And Mary, in that case, his mother was listed as one of the beneficiaries to whom the money could be distributed. that trust was considered to be invalid, and all the assets in the trust were considered to be countable. Control over distributions. I've seen people tell clients this. I've seen people say, well, you know, you can keep control of these assets because as long you can say in the trust that even though your children are the beneficiaries, or your nieces or your nephews are the beneficiaries, that you have to authorize any distributions to any of those children before they can be made. So you're maintaining complete control. If you've got that much control, there is a legitimate chance that the funds over which you have that control are going to be considered to be countable. Finally, the house. There is an ongoing debate among elder law attorneys regarding the house issue. There are two ways in which typically the house gets transferred to the irrevocable trust. In one, the transfer is made to the trustee, but the older person keeps a so-called life estate in the house, the right to live in the house for the rest of their lives, right? In the second one, the entire interest in the house is transferred to the trustee, but it is said in the trust that the older person has the right to continue to live in the house, and the trustee will pay for the benefits of that. That flew for a long time. But this recent trust that was invalidated had that provision in it, and the court raised the fact that that was one of the reasons why they were declaring the trust to be invalid. So, why is that? Well, because what is a house? What is owning a house? It's being able to live in it. I mean, it's some other things, but really it's being able to live in it. So if somebody else, the trustee, owns your house, but you have the right to live in it, you know, don't you still have the right under some circumstances to have that asset, right? So those are issues you want to be concerned about. Next slide. Finally, if you're Frank and Mary and you're worried about this kind of advanced planning, your situation is very different. And the reason is because if either Frank or Mary went to a nursing home, if Mary went to a nursing home and Frank were still alive, then while she can't have more than $2,000, he can own the house. He can have about $116,000 in cash or cash equivalents. And in addition to that, he can have infinite income. So what could be done in that case, if Mary were going to the nursing home, is the house could be transferred to Frank. Frank could keep about $115,000 in cash. And Frank could take all the rest of the money and buy an annuity. Simply a contract with an insurance company. As long as through that contract, the insurance company is paying Frank in equal monthly payments over a term that is shorter than his life expectancy, all of the payments. In that case, the purchase of the annuity is a legitimate conversion from an asset to income. Frank now has the house and less than $115,000 in cash. Mary has less than $2,000, and she can qualify for mass health. That can be done literally in a week. So if you're married, you're both alive, and you've got concerns about Alzheimer's, you don't have to do transfers out to third parties or to an irrevocable trust. What you should do, next slide, is make sure that all assets are held in individual names, not in joint names, because the goal of your planning is to make sure that you don't end up in Mary's situation as a widow with just Mary Jr. Because if she becomes the owner of the assets and Frank is dead, now she's stuck having to look at this 5-year look-back period. So you put assets in individual names, you change your wills to say, typically the wills of Frank and Mary would say, well, you know, what I really want is when I die, I want my spouse to get everything. I want Mary to get everything. You change that. You say in your will, I want everything to be held in trust for the benefit of my spouse, not go to him or her directly. Third, you specify who the trustee is going to be, and you specify that one of your children can be the trustee of that trust. Finally, and by the way, if you structure things that way, if Frank structured things that way, and Frank owned all the assets at the moment of his death, the day after, all assets would be safe for Mary's benefit. Finally, and that relates to that last point, you make sure that each person, Frank and Mary, have done powers of attorney so that assets can be changed by some third party in their name, so that if it turns out that Frank is dying, if he is sick, if he had a stroke and he's in the hospital, we have the ability to transfer any assets that Mary may have been owning to Frank, so that at the moment of his death, all assets are in his name and therefore are instantly safe for Mary's benefit. Next slide. So, that's what you want to do if you're worried about Alzheimer's. If you're most of the people it looks like in this room, right? If you're getting older like I am, right? You have worries about Alzheimer's, but you don't have it. You're not having early symptoms right now, or really worried about Alzheimer's. But what do you do if that's the situation? First of all, how do you figure out what are the symptoms, and how do you figure out whether they're really telling you something? Ken?
I think everybody thinks of, I lost my keys, I can't find my keys, what do I do? Well, if you're a normal person without dementia and you've lost your keys, most likely you can retrace your steps, where you were, where you went, where you might have put them down, and find them. A person with Alzheimer's is unable to do that, is unable to retrace their steps. When your memory and cognition become a disruption in your life, that's when the concerns become bigger for you and for your family. When you're no longer able to manage daily tasks, your checkbook, paying bills, taking in the mail and sorting them accordingly. Sometimes what we always find with Alzheimer's and dementia is folks that are diagnosed with this start to withdraw and start to isolate. And I don't know if any of you have experienced this. Maybe you haven't seen your parent in a long time and you enter the house and they've got a stack of bills like this. Why? Because they can't manage their daily living tasks. So we've given you a few cognitive symptoms where it's trouble understanding, trouble comprehending, things you would normally be able to do, and now having difficulty with that. I'll explain the visual image and spatial relationships. That does happen further along down the line, but vision, all senses of a person with Alzheimer's will diminish over time. The one thing that someone with Alzheimer's that will hold on to forever is their ability to feel. Happy, sad, mad, they'll feel that for the rest of their life. But the ability to see things correctly, where they might be walking on a floor that's nice and clean and shiny, might look wet, which would propose walking across a floor might be a very difficult challenge for them. Sometimes going and finding one of those black mats in front of a door might be a welcome mat, but for them they're seeing a hole in the floor. So visual, hearing, taste, all those things start to diminish. Misplacing things and not being able to retrace your steps, we talked about. What about the emotional side of things? What starts happening with someone with Alzheimer's or dementia? Mood swings, changes in mood, changes in personality, withdrawal, isolation, becoming angry and frustrated with what's happening with them. These are all typical responses to something that's happening to them that they have absolutely no control over. Problems with reading, writing, word finding. When you see someone, you know them, and you just can't remember their name. That happens to me all the time. I don't have Alzheimer's, but it still happens. But for someone who is unable to learn new information, that can really be a social challenge. That's why I see a lot of couples who would go out on a Saturday night and have dinner with other people, start to cancel those plans because now it's becoming, like Art said, a little bit of an embarrassment for them, that they can't remember names, they can't remember the words to say. Next slide, please. What do you do in the case where you feel that your spouse or your parent or yourself start to have those symptoms? Best thing to do, hardest thing to do, talk to your physician. Because there's a lot of things that can look like dementia that can be treated, and it reverses itself. An example of that is a urinary tract infection. Especially with our senior population, someone comes down with a urinary tract infection and it's immediate cognitive change. So we'll see some changes going on in someone. Once they get on an antibiotic, the infection's cleared up, their memory's fine. So that's the thing, is that if you have a vitamin deficiency, or you may have some other medical process going on that might have an effect on your brain, but is treatable. Just remember that we want to rule out anything else going on before we give it that label of Alzheimer's. If your doctor does have some concerns, because there's some tests they can run, like a mini mental status exam, where they'll sit you down and ask you questions and ask you to repeat back what they're saying. And if there's concerns after that, the next step would be to seek out a neurologist. A neurologist who specializes in dementia symptoms, and they can run a battery of tests to really get that diagnosis for someone with Alzheimer's, because it's important to get and know what type of dementia you're dealing with. They're all different. The symptoms might look the same, but the treatment and the course of it and the way it will progress is very different. And lastly, geriatric care management, GCM. We want to introduce you to that concept because they're a wonderful resource for people living in the community that need help putting together the puzzle pieces in order to create a good plan of care. Arthur brings up all the legal aspects that we want to be thinking of. Well, we need to think of what's the best way in which to treat this. Certainly not isolation and hiding in your own home. It's to get out. And these geriatric care managers can help you figure out at what stage of the disease process, what is out there for resources for you. Geriatric care management will connect you with everyone that you need, including Elder Services of Worcester. Socialization. I want to talk a little bit about what that means. If you've retired and you're not seeing any dementia symptoms at all, what you want to do is volunteer your time. Keep connected with people and engage with people socially, because if you don't, then any type of dementia that may be starting would just progressively get worse quicker. There's full day programs, part day programs. I represent Pleasant Trees Adult Day and Consulting Services, which is in Marlborough, which is a home-based social model program. There's medical model programs. And adult day health can be covered by Medicaid in some circumstances, and my entity, Social Day, is private pay. But what you want to be careful of is when you're starting to plan the care of a loved one with Alzheimer's, the least restrictive environment possible. Meaning, if you notice someone's isolating, becoming depressed and withdrawn, introduce them to maybe some classes at the senior center that they would like to enjoy. Or a social day model where folks are very high functioning but do have memory issues. What I've seen in the past is that when people think of adult day health, if someone's not ready for that and they're introduced to that, it can be very frightening. So that's where a geriatric care manager might come in play and tell you exactly what that person should be appropriate for.
And I guess I really wanted to kind of emphasize, how many people have heard of geriatric care managers? Could you raise your hand? So maybe like 5 or 6 people out of about 25 people who are here. Geriatric care managers, this field has evolved over the last 10 or 15 years. I've been doing elder law now, God, it just seems like forever. But originally these folks weren't around, but increasingly you're finding people who are nurses and social workers, but who have a real interest in working with the elderly, who've really tried to look at marketing themselves as people who are basically there to help you figure out what the issues are, to help you figure out what your situation is and kind of what the plan can be. A lot of folks, if you've got early stage Alzheimer's, a lot of people are really afraid to talk to a doctor, right? You don't want to go there. You don't want it to be in your chart, right? Typically it's your family doctor, so you're kind of embarrassed about that, right? There are a lot of reasons why people won't talk to somebody. a third party, a geriatric care manager will probably come in, help you kind of figure out what your situation is, and maybe make some suggestions for you. That's why I strongly recommend it. The other thing that once again, I don't think we can emphasize too much what Tammy was talking about in terms of socialization, right? As I said when I started, most people don't think of Alzheimer's as a disease, they think of it as an embarrassment. Something is happening to your spouse, all of a sudden, you don't want to go out as much anymore, and you don't want to see the people that you used to see anymore, because you're afraid it's going to be embarrassing. Now, and it may be that because it's going to be embarrassing, you don't want to see them, but you want to see somebody, right? You want to keep your loved one as engaged as possible, because as Tammy had pointed out, lack of engagement is one of the things that causes dementia to kind of speed up. So you want to be very sensitive to those things. So you want to look for those kinds of
The easiest way I tell people to think about it, if you're a diabetic and you're insulin dependent, you take the insulin, correct? With dementia, the answer is socialization, for sure. So we want to make sure we engage folks with that.
Because I guess I've just had a lot, and I know that there's a social day model here right in Worcester. There isn't one here. And in terms of half-day models, there is actually a program. One of the reasons we're talking about these, we're trying to encourage places like here, the Council on Aging here, to look at these half-day programs where you could have some kind of program built around the Council on Aging. That's another kind of trustworthy person you can talk to try to figure out if people can come here and have socialization, have other things that can be happening with them. So thank you. One other thing before we talk about roll back another one. Caregiver agreements. If you are married and you've got Mary Jr., and Mary Jr. and Mary both agree that Ma's having a little more problems here, and Mary hasn't done the kind of planning that would have protected the assets that Mary has. One possibility here would be, at this point, Mary Jr. is probably spending a lot of time with Mary, and she may want to enter into a caregiver agreement with Mary, especially if that caregiver agreement is documented or the need for it is shown by a report from the geriatric care manager that shows that Mary needs a given amount of hours, that she needs somebody to take care of her bills and to get her to places and to cook her meals and to do these other things. So that you've got some documentation that this is really helping Mary. And then Mary enters into a written agreement with her daughter, agreeing to pay her for some of the things that the daughter would be doing anyway. The reason why I mention that is, the Mass Health rule is, these caregiver agreements are valid, and you can legitimately be paying your daughter, right, or your son. Typically it's not the son, right? Typically it's always the daughter, right? But you can be paying them or another family member or friend to do the things they would do anyway, right? But if it isn't in writing, then Mass Health is going to assume, if it's your daughter or your son, that they're doing it out of love and affection for you. Well, guess what? They are. I mean, they wouldn't do it normally, right? But as a result of that, if a year later you need to go into a nursing home and you've got this money left in your account, and Mass Health says, well, that money really has to be spent down on the nursing home care. Well, you could have spent it by giving it to that son or daughter who is taking that kind of care for you. Now, if you do that, once again, it has to be in writing. The amount that is being paid to the son or daughter needs to be in the market, right? And that's one of the things the geriatric care manager can tell you, is how much people charge for this stuff, right? So you could make the numbers be reasonable. And this needs to be documented. But it is a way to deal with these asset issues. Finally, next slide. What happens if Mary, or in either case, either Frank is still alive or Frank's not alive, and Mary really has slipped, and so she's needing not just some socialization, and that's great for her, but she really needs some care at home. Well, once again, the issue is, in the absence of demonstrating, of getting to a certain standard, no one's going to be paying for that care at home. If you need respite care, if you need people to come in just for a while to clean up, right, to do any of those things, that's not going to get paid for, unless it can be demonstrated, well, and really two things. Unless you convince Becky Nadeau here that you need some services, because some services can be provided actually kind of early on in this process. But in order to get substantial amounts of services, you need to be able to demonstrate that Mary, in the absence of those services, would need nursing home care. So I'd like to introduce Becky, have her talk about the programs that are run through Elder Services of Greater Worcester, Inc. Is that right?
No, it's right there.
That was a test. I was just saying if I could do it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the frail elder waiver. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me back there? Okay, great. Elder Services of Worcester area is one of 27 aging service access points in the state of Massachusetts. Every agency covers the entire state, so we're all allocated specific areas, and this is our area here, and we do cover Grafton. Elder Services is a private nonprofit organization. All of our funding does come through the state of Massachusetts, so the Executive Office of Elder Affairs is our regulating entity that we follow for all of our budgeting, all of our regulations that we have to follow. The mission of all of the ASAPs is to help to keep elders in their home with dignity and independence for as long as possible, and postponing or preventing nursing home placement. That is our goal, that is our mission, and we do try dearly every possible way to keep people in their homes. We do have eligibility criteria that need to be met for any of the programs that we provide services through. You need to be age 60 or older unless you have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or related type of dementia, and there's a long list of them that I'm not going to go into, and you can be under the age of 60 and in need of relief for your caregiver. The second eligibility criteria is a functional impairment level that we have our case managers come out and assess the elder on their needs. Do you need assistance with housework, laundry, food shopping, transportation, money management, bathing, any hands-on type of assistance, transfers, dressing, you name it. So there's a long list of things that they assess, and depending on what you need assistance with would determine whether or not you meet that functional impairment level. The third eligibility criteria is your financial. We provide services to people who are under a specific income as an individual or as a couple. And there are ways to kind of work around that too as well. If you have Alzheimer's and you have a 24-hour caregiver or a daily caregiver, you may have an income higher than that, and we can put in some respite relief to that caregiver. We provide a list of services that can meet those functional impairment levels that I mentioned. We have personal care workers who will provide that hands-on transfer and bathing assistance. We have homemakers who will provide the housework, laundry, shopping, depending on what that need is. We also do pay for, within our budget restrictions, social daycare for those people who do have Alzheimer's, dementia, or are isolated and have depression. It doesn't just have to be limited to dementia and Alzheimer's. That we may pay for 1, 2 more days, depending on what program that person is eligible for. We do also provide the adult day health for those people who do not have Mass Health paying for the adult day health. We have respite companions or senior companions, the home delivered meal program, and on and on. There's a long list, and I do have brochures on the table that list some of those services. So, depending on what program our case managers find you eligible for would determine what level of care we can provide. One of those programs that we can provide services through that allows for a higher level of care is called the Community Choices Program. That is one that we provide the services through directly. The only thing with that, though, is that you do have to be eligible for Mass Health. How can you be eligible for Mass Health? You have to meet an income eligibility criteria and an asset eligibility criteria. The asset has to be under $2,000, and the home is not counted towards that. And Arthur has explained how you can protect some of that income, transfer to trusts and things like that. I'm not going to go into that. I'm leaving that for Arthur. But that's the asset limit, and then there's the income limit. What if you do not fall within that income limit? What if you earn more than that? There is still a way to access Mass Health where you wouldn't otherwise qualify. And this is through the frail elder waiver. The income limit for the frail elder waiver for a single person is $2,130 a month. It's triple, just about triple the amount than going directly through your 100% eligibility criteria. Again, you still have to meet that asset limit, though, of up to $2,000. For the frail elder waiver, there's two other aspects that you have to meet, not just the income and the asset. I think you need to go back to the previous slide. You have to also meet a clinical eligibility criteria, which is you have to be eligible for nursing home placement. Doesn't mean you have to go to the nursing home, just means you have to be eligible for. We have nursing staff that will assess for that clinical eligibility criteria, and it's based off of the regulations set by the state. We have to basically say, you are eligible for nursing home placement according to the Mass Health regulations, or the Medicaid regulations. The third criteria that has to be met is you have to be receiving at least one service from an ASAP. If for Grafton folks, it would be through our agency because we cover Grafton. If you lived in another town, it depends on which ASAP covered that, but it's just one service. If you're eligible for Medicaid, you don't pay for that service. Okay, I just want to make sure that's clear. Anybody who's on Mass Health does not pay for any of the services we provide. Now, I mentioned that there was an income eligibility for our services. If you didn't have Mass Health, your co-payment for any services would be based on your income, so it's a sliding scale. But again, for Mass Health folks, there is no cost for the criteria, so if you're getting that one service, you don't have to pay for it. Then Medicaid starts paying for all the other care that you may have in there. And then you could potentially access the community choice program that I mentioned, but that is not the only program out there. The Frail Elder Waiver Program is a key to access other community programs. One is the program for personal care attendant program. Personal care attendant program, as Arthur was explaining, that you want to pay for your daughter to provide your care for you privately between you. Well, what if your money runs out and you still want your daughter to provide that care? How are you going to continue to pay her to do that? You can do that through the personal care attendant program. Again, there's additional eligibility criteria. I do have fact sheets that are on the table for all of these Mass Health programs. But you could potentially have Mass Health now pay your daughter to provide your care.
Thank you. Can we just go back to the ADL slide? I just wanted to kind of emphasize this. As Becky mentioned, the key is, in order to be eligible for the frail elder waiver, you need to be demonstrating that in the absence of the use of the frail elder waiver, you'd be qualified for a nursing home. That's the reason why it's called a waiver. It's a special waiver that allows you to get more benefits than you'd normally be getting at home. But there is a difference between what Mass Health thinks the condition you need to be in to go to a nursing home, and what you might think the condition is you need to be in order for you to actually want to go to a nursing home, right? Those are very different things, because people, will think to themselves, I have to be really bad off to be going to a nursing home. That's the last place I want to go. But the standard is, right, that you need to either, if I'm getting this right.
There's actually more than what's listed here. Just to jump
Yep.
in on this.
Yep.
You can have a need for a nurse to be in, providing you some type of a skilled care and need assistance with bathing and dressing. That would qualify you. Something as limited as that. So if you need a nurse in to manage your insulin, for example, and you need some bathing assistance, maybe transfer or dressing assistance, you could potentially be eligible.
So two
under those regulations.
So two of the activities of daily living plus needing some kind of nursing assistance.
Right.
Or even...
But it's not even just limited to that. It could be in conjunction 24-hour use of oxygen You may need the insulin-dependent diabetic care. And you may not have some of these ADLs. The big one that is a key that we're finding in a lot of these approvals is medication management, that you need assistance with your medication in some form.
Now, how
It's
about
not all of them.
And sorry, how about if you're wandering? What about if you're still able to move around okay, but you really have this tendency
The confusion,
Yep.
the dementia, those fall into some of these activities of daily living because you may need reminders to do them. You may need supervision to do them, but you still physically can do them. But mentally, you can't remember to do them, or you can't remember the steps to do it. But once you're guided into it, so you may not need somebody to actually physically bathe you, but you may need somebody to talk you through it or remind you to do it. So that's why I said there's more than just these criteria that are on the board. If you question it, have the assessment done, because our nurses will walk you through it, go through the whole thing, and then let you know whether or not you meet that criteria.
And will you actually go to people's houses?
Yes, we do everything in your homes.
And how do they find you? I know they can certainly call the Council on Aging and they tell them where
Yep.
you are. Can they just call you?
You can call our information and we have an information and referral specialty unit that you can contact through our main number, and again, we have our brochures up front. For those who don't want a brochure, it's 508-756-1545. That will be assigned to one of our nurses if it's just for the screening for the nursing home eligibility, or it will be assigned to one of our case managers, and our case managers will contact you within 3 days, it's required. Set up an appointment with you in your home. Now, if you have somebody that's in rehab in a nursing facility, we'll go to those nursing facilities as well to help you transition out of the nursing facility back into your home. If you don't have a home, because we actually even help people that are in the nursing home under what's called long-term care, we help them get back into the community. Say they've improved or they want another chance out in the community, we will help people transition out of the nursing home, for those that are going to be safe enough, back into a community setting, and we will also assist with trying to set up some housing.
So these people are really good, right? And you actually pay them, right? Because they're funded 100% through the state. So they're providing services, right? These are your tax dollars at work. And I guess what I wanted to emphasize regarding this whole issue of whether you qualify is, so if you call them to find out whether you qualify medically, they're not going to like penalize you if you're wrong.
Right.
You know, they're not going to say, oh, you know, that was, not only are you not qualified, but we're sending you a bill for $1,000. You know, so it's like when you've got those early stage Alzheimer's, or you might be, and you want to talk to a geriatric care manager. If you're at home, or you know somebody who is at home and they're agonizing over this, trying to figure out how all this stuff is going to work and how to cover all the costs, call these folks, and you can find out whether you're actually going to qualify for some of the programs. Is that kind of a fair summary?
Yep, any of the programs, and it's no fee for our case managers to come out and do that assessment with you. We even have a couple new programs that we have people going into the hospitals and talking with the elders to let them know what's available to them out in the community. Not just our services. We want to make sure that the people that we're serving in the community, whether it's directly through us or not, are getting the right care to meet their needs for yourself or for your loved one. So that's why I brought fact sheets on programs that we don't even cover. Program for All-Inclusive Care, which is the PACE program. There's a couple of them that's directly through Medicaid. They can also access the Frail Elder Waiver Program, but they do it themselves. The Senior Care Option programs, they are also not directly through us, and they can also do the Frail Elder Waiver Program themselves as well. I put those fact sheets out there because I want you to have all the information to make the best choices for yourself or for your loved one.
Thank you. Now, I just wanted to cover a couple more financial items, and then we'll take questions. Roll back a couple. Roll back another one. There. Remember, if Frank and Mary are both still alive, and Mary is trying to qualify for the frail elder waiver. It is just her income that counts, not Frank's. So no matter what Frank's income is, if Mary needs the services and would otherwise be eligible for nursing home care, she can get them through the frail elder waiver. Similarly with assets, there's an asset limit on her assets, but it doesn't apply to Frank. So literally, she could transfer the house, she could transfer all of the cash to Frank and then apply for the frail elder waiver. The rules are different if you need nursing home care. We talked about that before. But I guess it goes back to that general theme. Don't guess. If you've got these kinds of issues, don't guess. Talk to your lawyer, talk to them, talk to some folks, and figure out if you qualify. You may be like pleasantly surprised that, and the reason why I say that is, I mean, I deal with folks all the time who are going through all the angst. It's bad enough that you're going through all of this because you have a loved one at home, or you're at home and you're having these kinds of symptoms, right? To have this financial cloud hanging over you at the same time and looking at your checkbook and saying, oh my God, how can I ever afford this? A lot of times you can get rid of those issues. And so you're left with what are the really important issues? How to give your loved one the best care. Thank you very much. Any questions regarding any of this from any of us? Yes, sir, and then you, sir. Sir.
Can you tell me what Alzheimer's is? Why is it different from why does a person have Alzheimer's instead of what? Dementia instead of dementia?
But remember, dementia, am I fair in saying this? Dementia is not a disease. Dementia describes a set of symptoms. Dementia, it means loss of memory, loss of control, some emotional issues. There are a whole cluster of things that are related to dementia, which are caused by different things. The major cause is Alzheimer's. The number that I've heard is that between 80 and 90% of the dementia cases are cases that are caused by Alzheimer's disease. Other causes are, is it Parkinson's?
Oh, there's a lot of different, which I could do a 4-hour talk on the different dementias.
You don't want to hear that talk,
right?
That's a really long talk.
But just to clarify, your question was, how do you know it's Alzheimer's and not other dementia? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I've been, I was determined that I was Alzheimer's, but I don't know what that means exactly.
It means you have the most prevalent type of dementia. As Arthur was saying, there's Parkinson's, there's Lewy body, there's Korsakoff's, there's frontal temporal lobe dementia, vascular dementia. When they give that the name Alzheimer's, they see, and they've done tests, and they see that the set of symptoms of the Alzheimer's type of dementia, that is what they're seeing when someone's diagnosed with it.
So that I guess, once again, those two words, because Alzheimer's is by far and away the greatest cause of that cluster of symptoms, they've become the same thing. In many people's minds, dementia and Alzheimer's are the same thing. And I guess, once again, the distinction is dementia, that it simply describes symptoms, right? Alzheimer's is one of the diseases which manifests itself through those symptoms. Does that answer your question? The best that we can do. Next time we'll bring a doctor, though. One of the presentations we want to do is with one of the geriatric care doctors who does a lot of this kind of work. Yes, sir.
I don't want to confuse things, but I wondered if we need to know the difference between an irrevocable trust and a testamentary trust. They're both mentioned in here.
Those aren't necessarily different. In the legal world, there are two kinds of trusts. There are testamentary trusts and the rest, right? A testamentary trust is a trust that is within your will. As part of your will, you say, as to the property that I die owning, instead of property going to this one or that one right away, I'm directing through my will that the asset be held in trust for the benefit of such and such a person. That, by the way, is always going to be irrevocable, because we did talk about what an irrevocable trust is, right? It's a trust that you can revoke and therefore take back all the money. That ends it when you're dead. You can no longer take back the money. So by kind of automatically, a will, the trust that is in a will is an irrevocable trust.
Irrevocable?
Irrevocable. Because it can't be revoked by you because you're dead. Right? Irrevocable is different from unamendable. Right? Those trusts oftentimes can still be amended by various people or terminated and the proceeds distributed, but there's a very specific meaning to revocation in the law, which means the person who puts the money in trust can literally say, I take it back, I want it back, right? And take the money back. If they can do that, that's a revocable trust. No matter what the terms of the trust, the other terms of the trust. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I just want to clarify one thing.
This gets mixed up all the time.
Yeah, okay. Maybe this is outside the issues we're discussing today, but a trust that names, a will that names a trust automatically is irrevocable?
A will, in addition to having a trust inside of the will, having a will that actually specifies, here are the trust conditions and this is the trust. That's called a testamentary trust. A will can also say, one of the beneficiaries of the trust, instead of being my daughter or my son or whatever, is going to be so-and-so as the trustee of a trust. That's a separate document, not part of the will.
Okay.
Does that clarify that?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Any other questions? Yes, sir, and then you, ma'am? Yes, sir?
Is it common in your planning to have two spouses split their assets and put them into individual irrevocable trusts that benefit each other?
Typically, the plan that you just described is a tax planning plan in which assets are divided up for the purpose of minimizing the likelihood that there will be an estate tax. In the plans, in the stuff that we're talking about, for mass health purposes, those trusts don't work, right? Because they are revocable at the time of death. And they don't come under that very narrow mass health exception that says that the usual rules regarding trusts, which say if the trustee can give anything to the beneficiary, then as far as mass health is concerned, everything that the trustee could give, has the discretion to give, is countable, right? That provision, if it's in a will, protects the asset. If it's in a regular trust, like the one that you're describing, something that gets prepared before you die, and that has assets put into it before you die, all those assets will be counted by mass health, and none of the money in that trust will be saved. It's a narrow distinction. It's because of a bizarre one-liner in the original federal law, which hasn't been changed. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So in the 5-year look back, what are they looking for? Do they look at your daily expenses, what you've spent the last 5 years?
What you'd be required to do is provide all of your financial statements and any checks that they want to verify, all deposits and withdrawals from any of your accounts or to any of your accounts over that 5-year period. And they'd want documentation regarding any closed accounts during that period. What happened to that one? Because basically they are looking, once again, if I'm the caseworker, I want you to show me that you didn't violate this rule over the 5 years, and the burden is on you to show me. If you haven't adequately documented that, I can deny you just for failure to document. Right? You have to show me that that's the case. Yes, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Question for Becky. Do you provide services to people who are in assisted living situations?
No, we don't. We only provide care to people who are in their own homes, whether it's an apartment complex or a residential home. You have to be living in your homes, but we can assist people out of facilities into the community.
And that applies to all of your programs. None of your programs
None of
apply
our
to
programs.
people who are in assisted living. Yes, ma'am.
Does Medicaid look at the point in time when an irrevocable trust was created?
Does Medicaid look back to the point in time when an irrevocable trust was
Like,
created?
is there?
No, the question always is, when were the assets transferred? The irrevocable trust was created 7 years ago, but there was an asset that was transferred to that irrevocable trust 3 years ago. Then that asset is countable. It's as if the asset didn't get transferred. The date of the irrevocable trust is not relevant, only the date of the transfers.
Oh, so if the trust was created like 3 years ago, and all the assets go into the trust in that 3-year period, then it doesn't.
The question is, if the trust was created 3 years ago and the assets go into the trust during that 3-year period, what happens? The answer is, every transfer is a separate transfer and has its own 5-year clock attached to it. Okay?
Thanks for the nursing facility one.
Yeah, and by the way, yeah, the transfer rules that I'm talking about are rules that apply to your eligibility for long-term care. That nursing home eligibility. The look-back periods are shorter or non-existent regarding your
Community.
qualification for community mass.
Right, so if you're living in your own home, or even the assisted livings, which was a question back there, that 5-year look-back period does not apply. Only if you're going to a nursing facility.
Right, except that if you're in assisted living, Mass Health doesn't pay for assisted living, only for nursing homes.
No, actually, they do under the group adult foster care program.
Except under the group adult foster care program, which leads me to the suggestion, we may do a separate seminar on group adult foster care because it's becoming increasingly important. Other questions? Yes, sir.
May I have a copy of the Worcester elderly services that are provided for a private home?
Can you have a copy of the services that are provided by Elder Services of Greater Worcester for a private home? They're right up here. They are right up here. So
And I would encourage you to visit the table because she's got so much information up there, plus the Alzheimer's Association information and education programs they have.
I can't hear you.
The information that's up here on the table has what you were asking for, plus a lot of other information, including the Alzheimer's Association pamphlet and information on that. So if
Finally,
you want to come up front and grab some information, we also have the caregiver guide up here as well, for any of you who haven't received one in the past.
one final note. The Alzheimer's Association, a nonprofit entity, national, very large organization. I know that Tammy is a member of the Metro West, the Alzheimer's Partnership, actually has a 24-hour hotline. If you've got an issue, if there's some crisis that's happening, or if you've got any kind of question, right, at any time you can call them or email them. It's a wonderful service. This stuff tends to be like that. It tends to be stuff where there are these emergencies that pop up. So please save that number and that email address. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.